Say hello, Mr. Cooper.
Welcome to the Carnegie Town Hall. The informational meeting will begin in approximately 30 seconds. Ready.
Good afternoon. Welcome to our Sioux Falls City Council informational meeting. Today's date's Tuesday, May 5th. I believe it's Councilor Rolfing's birthday. Happy birthday, Councilor Rolfing, and happy belated birthday, Councilor Urbanbach. So, yes. So,
and then
Councilor Karski's birthday.
yes.
Well, yeah, it's
You're
still
a real old
couple
one, aren't you?
days old away, but yes. We will start with our City Council open discussion. Councilors. Wow, that's unusual. Okay, then, we'll go right into our presentations. Mike Cooper, our annexation project update. A lot of work being done here, and just an update on the progress that's being made. Welcome.
Yeah, good afternoon, Council. Mike Cooper, Planning and Building Services. Mark Cotter will be participating in the presentation today as well. And Deborah Gajkowski is the project manager. This is one of the top 10 projects that we've identified for 2015 regarding the annexation of subdivisions. We've been working with Land Use Committee, but today we wanted to give the whole council an update of where we're at with this process. We have a steering committee that's been formulated, and you can see that we have 2 representatives of the City Council. Mark and I myself are the project sponsors. Danny Brown with the City Attorney's Office, Kendra Simmonsman, Darren Smith, Tracy Turbeck, and then, of course, our project manager. So we've been meeting on a regular basis to kind of go through the process of annexation. So what is annexation again? It's a process by which the city extends our corporate limits. Those annexation changes are all approved by City Council action. We also are then allowed to enforce our statutes to those areas that are annexed. We have taxing authority along with the respective county and school districts that are affected by those geographical areas, and also a privilege of voting within city elections. The project need goes back to 2011. We did a comprehensive annexation program analysis. We've identified around 50 properties that would meet the criteria to be annexed, and typically those properties are either adjacent to the edge of the city limits or in some cases completely surrounded by city limits. They may be undeveloped, they may be developed with rural residential, but the criteria that we would use to identify those is that in many cases they're already benefiting from city services because of the fact of the proximity that they're located. And also it's important to have a coordinated annexation program because it helps manage our infrastructure improvements so that we can better extend water, sewer, roadways, and other related services, whether it's going to be a fire station or a city park, whatever it might be. And in the long run, with a better coordinated CIP process, we can save money. The goals that we've identified is to create a process that we can help streamline these annexations. Again, there's 2 ways to annex property. There's voluntary annexations, which are the ones that you typically see, and then there's also ones that can be initiated by the city through state law. There's a process. But we want to standardize as we go talk to these areas that we've identified that we would like to consider for annexation. We've been working hard on trying to come up with a standardized policy, procedure, and design of what we're going to tell these folks, particularly if some of these are existing residential development areas. What is going to be the impact on them in terms of improvements? What level of improvements are there going to be? and how are those improvements going to be paid for. And you have worked with this, and Mark will be talking about this under some of our accomplishments, so that we can assure or ensure that the assessments that we've identified really correlate with benefits received to the property owners. So there's going to be impacts to the property owners, but there's also going to be impacts to the city with some of these annexation areas. And then finally, a goal would be just to manage the overall development, execution, and completion of these designated subdivision annexation areas. Additional benefits: it provides an improved framework for expansion. In the past, we've identified annexation areas that are really in the pathway of growth. The extreme example would be where you have developer A that's waiting to extend water, sewer through landowner B, and that landowner B is not in the city limits, but it's an identified growth area. It's within an identified utility basin area. And really, it's a fair way of allowing for a more rational and efficient delivery of services to residents. So we have, again, we have people that are within islands in the city or on the edge of the city that in some cases are really indirectly at least benefiting. And then finally, it's important that all users would share fairly in the cost of operating the city. And that's part of our goal too, with identifying where these annexation areas should be prioritized. So next, Mark will get up and talk to you about the good things, the accomplishments that we've identified and have been working on so far.
Thank you, councilors. Mark Cotter with the Office of Public Works. It's been an active committee, and we do have some accomplishments to share with you as we continue to press forward on this large need for our city. The first is modified the special assessment ordinance in June of 2014, essentially addressed the interest rate that was more in line with what Tracy Turbeck assisted, and also the extension of terms up to 20 years. And so trying to be fair on the interest rate, but also trying to spread out those terms greater distance, some of which we've seen in other cities, just to allow those financing of those assets over a much longer period of time. Created a special assessment procedure to standardize assessments. This has probably been the area where we spent the most time in really trying to look at the cost and the locations of the assets that go into building out a new subdivision. Drainage assessment is based off square footage or based off area, which is appropriate. That's where the rain falls, or that potentially if you have a large lot and you're collecting your sump pump water, it should be tied to area as opposed to address. And then streets, sidewalks, lights, sanitary sewer assessments are based off frontage feet on the address side. One of the changes that we did prior is that if you had a corner lot, you were assessed for both sides, really without having to prove that you have additional benefit. And so we went back to for those particular improvements, let's take an entire subdivision, but let's only assess based on the address side. There was really two different types of subdivisions that we see. We usually see like a standard grid where things are laid out very logically, and we can look at that address side as an appropriate means for assessment. But we do have a number of areas like on the right, which is non-standard street grid, where we'd have a cul-de-sac, and trying to find the most appropriate way to spread these costs. On the cul-de-sac, for example, there's 5 lots there that are served by that road, but as you go to the bulb of the cul-de-sac, there's very little amount of front footage. And so in that particular example, that would be add up the cost of that road and cul-de-sac, and then divide it by 5. That's a more equitable way to spread those costs. We developed the top 5 priority properties to annex, and they are Prairie Meadows subdivision, just south of 41st and Ellis Road, and we've had a lot of discussions about that. This next one, Batho, Bindert, and Barron subdivision, which is generally near 85th Street and Tallgrass. It's on the north side of 85th Street and then just east of Tallgrass. Fairly similar neighborhood, gravel roads. I'd say a little bit larger lots down in that area, but generally a rural subdivision with several houses that we've essentially started to annex all the land around them, and it's prime for them to be in the top 5. We've got 3 private property addresses, 57th and Southeastern, 69th and Southeastern, and 26th Street and Highway 11. Mike Cooper and Chad Heavey in our office has begun to have meetings with all 3 of those individual property owners so we can continue to educate and advance those. Working with Danny Brown with the City Attorney's Office, or drafting a procedure to calculate the benefit derived from the improvements, essentially wanting to make that test that not only do we want to just look at what are the costs of the improvements for the utilities, the surfacing, the sidewalks, the streetlights, but how does that particularly relate to the improvement for a particular property? And so we're working with Danny to write that procedure. The risks, city may not be able to recoup all the improvement costs. There are a number of situations in these subdivisions that may drive for the city to participate in some of those costs, or that first bullet that speaks to the benefit derived, that if there are costs that are above the benefits derived, the city may have to absorb those costs. And then property owners may opt out of assessments for improvements. There are certainly state law that guides that, and there is a process as we come forward to you and first identify that, hopefully that there's a voluntary annexation procedure. And then the next would be that we want to bring them up to minimum design standards with street, sidewalks, street lights, that we would identify the resolution of necessity, meaning basically just bringing before you as a council that there's a need to improve these streets now that they're in the city limits. And then if there is no objection, then we move forward with the construction of those projects and then bring back the final assessment roll. But there is a procedure that's guided by state law that allows homeowners to actually protest that out. Next steps is we're focused on completing the annexation of these top 5. Continuing to pursue annexation of all properties meeting the criteria to be annexed. As Mike stated, we've got basically 50 candidates that fit this criteria. Ensure internal processes are well established and flexible enough to address most annexation situations. Encourage petitioned annexations or voluntary annexations. And then if there are improvements as we press forward with annexing these properties, if there's necessary legislation to change, that we would bring that and work with you on that to advance that through the South Dakota Municipal League. That's our presentation and update. Mike and I are both here if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Mark. Questions from the council? Council Staggers.
Yeah, Mark, you mentioned 50 properties, is that right, that we're thinking about annexing?
I would probably phrase it as 50 areas.
Oh, okay. 50.
Because in some of these particular areas, like Prairie Meadows is nearly 100 parcels of land. Okay.
But of those 50 areas, how many of them went to voluntarily join the city?
I'm not sure. In some cases, I just talked to a property owner this last week where they've lived out there for a period of time, and they've started to see the city annexing property, and it's starting to mature around them, but they just don't know what the process is. This lady's comment was more in the line of, we know at some point in time we will be annexed, and so it becomes. It's a big education piece, and I think that's why if we can get some of the tools for property owners to really learn about what the steps of annexation are, some of which will require improvements, like Prairie Meadows needs all public improvements brought in. Some don't. Some are an undeveloped parcel. They just happen to have annexed land all the way around them. So that's why we talk about that. We want to make sure that we have a procedure in place that's flexible to deal with most situations.
Have they been told any numbers as far as how much they're going to be paying to join the city or not?
It just depends on the stage of our discussion. So like, for example, Prairie Meadows did, because based on our last procedure, we'd had several public meetings and shared that. I don't believe one of the next ones, which is that rural subdivision down near 85th Street in Tallgrass, I don't believe that we've done the study yet to actually calculate what those roadway, sidewalk, lights, utility costs are. And so, but we want to actually identify, they're the top 5, and that would be the next natural one for us to go to.
If I can just say one more thing, and that is, I mean, this is going to be a lot of money for these property owners, and I think the sooner they know about it, the better. So do we have any goal as to when we're going to be telling them this is an estimated cost?
Yes, we do. The 5 that we've identified that we want to do this year are up on the screen again. The bottom 3 that are the smaller parcels with either 1 or 2 property owners, as Chad and I have met with them, we do go through an analysis of here's your current situation in terms of your property assessment, property taxes, and then this is what it potentially would be after annexation. So we do try to go through that in as much detail as we can. With Prairie Meadows, because it's a larger area, it will be more impacted by future improvements. That's one that we've taken a little bit longer of having some engineering analysis. But I would say that in general, probably the main questions that we get asked would be the timing, A. B would be the storm drainage assessment and the street maintenance assessments that they would be responsible for after annexation. And then some of the other properties we've identified that we would look into see if they would qualify as a rural service district, which means that if they're agriculturally used, as long as they stay under that situation, they would be assessed at the township mill levy instead of the city mill levy after they're annexed. So there's different information like that each one is a little bit unique, but we do try to give them as much information as we can estimate of what the impacts would be.
Councilor Jameson.
Mike or Mark, I'm not sure who, but maybe Mike, you were just talking about those specifications depending on where the individual property is. So if they're on an arterial road or their home is on a collector or just a regular side street, does that matter?
You would still pay a street maintenance fee, yes. If any street frontage is required to pay that $1 per foot.
But so if you're on an arterial road and you were annexed in and country highway, say, and all of a sudden annexed in and you wouldn't have to pay for that road in front of your building.
No, not for the street itself. No, that would come under our other future street improvements.
But if I was a block off of that road and that whole area got annexed in, and now they're putting a new paved road in front of my home for my driveway and everything else, now I've got a bigger bill.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
Just like any other property owner would in the city. And then the other one is the storm drainage fee, which is a fee that we charge everybody in the city based on your use and your acreage.
Okay, and then one last question. If I could, on your project goals, you had standardized policies, procedures, and design for improvements. I would, correct me if I'm wrong, but going back over the years, you've encountered other developments, older places that we've annexed into the city that maybe had paved roads, no gutters, or storm drainage. But you didn't choose to improve those roads to a city standard because it probably wasn't smart, only because it wasn't necessary to repave the road because it was already there. And I'm just worried about the standardized policies versus maybe a little flexibility, because I'm sure there's going to be locations that come in the future that you'll say, well, we would never recoup our total cost, if we rebuilt all these roads, because, and the level of service that's there is probably not perfect, but it's okay. Are you I just hate to see us get so fixed on our standardized method that we aren't as maybe potentially flexible as we potentially could be. Even though it does create problems for us down the road like it has today, I know that. But I can sense going forward when we force somebody to annex in and they're like, wait a minute, we've got paved or asphalt roads in front of our home. We don't have a drainage problem. We've got good roads. We don't want you to tear them out just to build them again, and we just, all that. So I'm just looking for some flexibility. Are you worried about that at all?
Well, I think we're probably basing it off, at least the ones that are in front of us are gravel streets, and we wanted to make sure that, and I would say too, we've taken feedback from some of those areas that were annexed 25, 30 years ago that all they did do was go in, put in a sewer and a water main, and then just pave the streets. They use the ditches as swales. They have concerns about drainage. Over time, they get filled in. And then the other real big issue is sidewalks, just accessibility. And so much has changed in the accessibility realm in the last 25 years that what we coined it as saying our minimum standards today is if anyone buys a piece of land, if they buy 10 acres of land today adjacent to Sioux Falls and they develop it, there's a minimum design standard, which is streets, curb and gutter, sidewalks, street lights, normal utilities. And so that's become a basic expectation, and a lot of times if these areas are all being annexed and all those areas around these rural subdivisions are at what we would consider the minimum standards, at some point in time, all these just become one large neighborhood. We don't want to have some of those fragments. Now, if, for example, if a rural subdivision just had gone through and repaved their streets, that's a situation we haven't talked about. We haven't faced that. I think we got a letter from a lady that was in Norton Froelich area, which is generally on North Cliff Avenue and east in that area. East up by like 34th Street North, if you're familiar with that area, and east of Cliff Avenue. And her comment was she was there when they got annexed, and it was understood to minimize cost and not do any curb and gutter, not do any sidewalk. And her letter stated, please don't let this happen again, because they do have drainage issues. They don't have accessibility. People and kids have to walk on the streets. And so that's not been something that we've had to address yet. And so I just appreciate the comment. We'll see as we face that. At some point in time, the city will end up going back into some of these latent areas, like we've done with Old Orchard. Some of these pavements are not going to last forever. They typically last about 25 years. And then we'll have to make that decision. Do we convert them at that point in time? And can we actually fit in curb and gutter and sidewalk and things like that? Okay.
Councilor Anderson.
I think this is probably going to be for Mark, but I'm not for sure. Under risk planning, you said property owners may opt out of assessments for improvement. Could you speak to that a little further?
There's a state law, and I would probably more appropriate if Danny Brown was here. He's our advice counsel on this, but I believe that if we bring a resolution of necessity forward for a particular area or neighborhood for you to consider.
Sorry.
Okay. That's why we're a good team. That those property owners can, if they can assemble 55% of the front foot property owners out there, they could essentially negate the resolution of necessity. which at that time becomes a local governing body decision. Do we move forward and absorb all the cost or not? Now, I'm not aware of that ever happening in Sioux Falls. There's typically, we truly try to find those common goals. We've addressed the interest rate, we've extended out the payment schedule, and truly try to make this a win-win. But it is a big education piece. That's what we're finding. And there's enough people that move in and out of subdivisions that if you let these discussions go on too long, you have to basically restart them. But there is a process. There is personal property rights that they could truly opt out.
Thank you.
Councilor Erickson.
Just one quick question. I know you talked about the 50 areas-ish that include more than just 50 properties. My question is I can't remember the time frame, but within the last year we saw a map that looked pretty spotty of islands throughout the city. Has that been identified as a priority as well to make sure that we don't have one red dot amongst the whole entire city, to making sure that all of a sudden we have a horse farm or whatever, and then the whole rest of the city?
Yes, and we can get you an updated version of that map that we've showed. We didn't include it in the presentation today, but that's the one that we've identified where those islands are, but also kind of where our top priorities are that we're trying to address to begin with. Again, as we talk to property owners, they all have different situations, different scenarios about the timing of what they have in mind. And so although we are trying to create some consistent policy, in the end, each one is a little bit unique.
Is that then identified, I'm sorry, is that identified as one of the priorities of making sure those islands are kind of removed and absorbed within the city?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, as much as we can, yes. And the ones that are, the ones that are part of our top 5 this year include some of those.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect, thank you.
No other questions. This is a work in project and just an update for us. I know we'll be moving forward. Anything else to add?
Just
Mike?
appreciate the council's support because it's been an interesting dialogue and we have a few more steps to get done, but we are making some progress. We'll keep you up to date. Thank you.
Not an issue that I don't think any other community in South Dakota really faces, so we are kind of working with rules that are probably a little old or non-existent for that would work best for us. So trying to make it happen, people. Next presentation. We have 2 reports. I think Rich Oaksel will be leading this off. Our public facility ticket fee and the follow-up on the status of audit recommendations. Welcome, Rich.
Good afternoon, Council. Jim David will help me get the reports pulled up on the screen there for the public to see. Should be in. Okay, these 2 reports were discussed with the Audit Committee and approved at the April meeting. The first one we'll look at is our annual report we do on the status of audit recommendations. As a part of our audit standards and also our internal audit charter, we're required to follow up when we make a recommendation to see if management implemented those recommendations. And so this report concentrated mainly on the 2013 audits. A couple of issues, just keep it right there, Jim. Some of the issues can't be corrected right away. Sometimes it takes quite a while for these management actions to be implemented, and I'll get into that a little bit later. Now, if we were to have a case where management was taking on a risk that we thought they should not take upon, that they weren't mitigating. We haven't run into that, but if we did, we would discuss that with the Audit Committee and decide what the proper action was. So, let's go to page 4. As I mentioned, some of these recommendations take quite a while to implement. In 2012, we did an audit of light and power, And one of the recommendations was to get a formalized work order system. And I was just visited with the new light superintendent a few weeks ago, and now they've just gone live in January of this year. So about 3 years later, they found a work order system that will work for them, and they are going live with that, and they're learning how to use that. The other thing we'd recommended was, at the time, about 3 years ago, was putting the laptop computers in the service trucks. And right now they've gone with a tablet system, which is working well. And another problem that we noticed for the trucks back then that did have a computer, that the service speed, the connection was pretty slow. And now they found that each tablet in the truck has a hotspot device. And this change, plus some software adjustments, has improved the service speed, so that improves the efficiency. And they also have access to the GIS maps in the truck, so that's increased their efficiency. And they're with the new superintendent now and the new work order system, they've changed some procedures and have some formalized procedures, so we consider that some progress there. Let's go to the next page, Jim, there, page 5 there. Okay. Back in, before 2012, we'd done an audit of the street department, and we'd recommended putting GPS devices on the street sweeper and the snow removal equipment. And we'd also suggested doing another analysis of the mix between leased motor graders and the ones that the city owns and the ones that the contractors operate. There's 3 different ways that the city is using equipment to clear the snow. At that time, the analysis hadn't been done for a while, and it was suggested maybe we need to look at that to see if we have the right balance of ones we own, ones we contract with, and ones we lease. And you should be getting reports soon. The city had hired Mercury Associates to do a fleet assessment and analysis. And I think their draft report is done, and you should be getting some sort of formal report on that. And Galen Huber had informed me that some of those issues will be addressed by the consultant, so we'll be interested in seeing what the recommendations are about that sort of thing. And so it's kind of a comprehensive fleet analysis, so we're looking forward to that. We'll continue to follow up on these. I can say as far as the 2013 audits, the majority of the recommendations have been implemented. Others are in progress, so we consider that good. And that's part of the benefit of having an internal audit department is you make a recommendation. If management agrees and implements it, then we've either controlled the risk or we've made had an opportunity for improvement. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer any.
Questions for Rich? All righty, let's go into the second half of the presentation.
Okay, the next one was discussed in some detail with the audit committee in April a few weeks ago, and it also come up here at the next the meeting right after this with fiscal committee. First of all, I'd just like to thank management, the finance department. We worked with the city attorney's office for their help on this audit and their cooperation. And then we also worked with the operators of the public facilities, the Canaries Baseball Club for the Sioux Falls Stadium, and then SMG Management for the event center, the convention center, and the arena. So what is this public facility ticket fee? What is this all about? This covers paid admission to events at the city-owned facilities that have a fixed seating in excess of 2,500. So it does not cover the pavilion and the Orpheum, but it would cover, as I said, the event center, convention center, arena, which is operated by SMG, and then the Sioux Falls Baseball Stadium, which is operated by the Sioux Falls Canaries Baseball Club. This generates approximately $300,000 annually, at least in 2013 it did. We would expect this amount to increase with the number of events going out at the event center with all these sold-out concerts and the attendance at the Stampede and the Storm games. We would expect that number to go up. On page 3, let's go to that, Jim. Okay. Overall, we found that the ticket fee is being properly charged at the 3 facilities that SMG operates. We had a few discrepancies, but overall, we could say they're collecting it correctly. Go to page 4 there. The problem was with the baseball stadium. The Sioux Falls Canaries were collecting the ticket fee at the rates established in 2004. They were still doing the 2004 rate, and it had been changed in 2005. So the lost revenue that we calculated going back 2 years, 2013, 2014, was about $10,000 by our calculations. We didn't go farther back because we simply didn't have the records for that. They get their tickets, Ticketmaster, and the records only go back so far. So we did talk to the attorneys about what we should do about that, and it was kind of decided, well, let's correct it going forward. So that was the consensus there. We did notice there was a conflict between the operator agreements and the city ordinance. For example, under the operating agreement with SMG, they collect the ticket fee and then they deposit it into the operating account. It doesn't get remitted to the finance department. But the ordinance is specific. It says that the fee shall be deposited in the general fund of the city. So there's a little mismatch between the agreement and the ordinance. And another discrepancy we noticed was the Canaries Baseball Club is remitting the ticket fee once a year. Their season kind of wraps up around Labor Day, and then maybe in November or December, the city will get one check for the whole season. And according to the ordinance, the fees are supposed to be collected and remitted within 60 days of collection. So, we should be receiving those from the baseball club, 60 days at the max after they've collected that fee. So that's never been enforced by the city. The finance department has not enforced that. Recommendations on page 5 through 7, we made, I think, 4 recommendations. I'll just cover 2 of them. One was simply simplify the ordinance, and the fiscal committee is going to discuss that immediately following this meeting. And then we also recommended the city finance department establish some procedures to verify the accuracy of the ticket fees collected. Right now, they'll simply receive the money in, and there's no procedure to verify if it's in a reasonable amount or if there's any documentation to back up the amount that's being received. So that was those are 2 of the 4 suggestions. So next it goes to fiscal committee, and it will be discussed in more detail. I think finance department will be there, and then I think representatives from SMG will be there as well. So hopefully once it gets through the fiscal committee, that the full council will see a revised ordinance sometime this year.
All right.
Is there any questions that I can
Councilor Staggers?
answer?
Not remitting money to the city on time, is there any penalty that can be imposed or any interest we can charge? Or
No, there's the ordinance simply, as it exists right now, it just says they should be, the operators will collect and remit within 60 days of receipt.
Okay.
And it says the fees will deposit in the general fund. There's no penalty provision in there, so it's not a lot of money out of that $300,000. The amount from the Canaries is probably 10%, maybe around $25,000 to $30,000 is what they collect. The vast majority of that ticket fee is collected by the SMG group for those 3 buildings, but there's no penalty if they.
No
Not
penalty,
in the ordinance.
no penalty in that ordinance. But
and the ordinance has no penalty provision. If
we have another ordinance that says if there is no penalty, then this is what it is. Would that apply?
I guess that would be up to the city attorney if they wanted to enforce that. And, that didn't come up in our discussion with the city attorney, but
That might be a good question.
That's a
for
good
the,
question.
Fiscal committee.
yeah, good question for fiscal committee. Yeah.
Other questions? Councilor Jameson?
Thank you, Rich. You'd mentioned that you'd reviewed the $10,113 with the city attorney, and they said they recommended going forward
To just correct.
to sure
That
they used the correct amount, but
yeah, I think there's some ambiguity. There's a written agreement with the Sioux Falls Canaries, and depending on how you read the agreement, you could have 2 different interpretations of that. So there's some wiggle room on that. How it deals with if that fee goes up, then the baseball club will get a credit towards their annual lease payment, and it's fairly complicated and subject to interpretation. So they felt like the best thing was just correct the ordinance, make sure any future or current agreements harmonize with ordinance and just make things better going forward.
And like you said, the mothership here really is the SMG buildings.
Yes.
And they've reviewed you've reviewed the language that they have. Is it the same ambiguity?
Yeah, that one example is in the agreement it says they'll put that money into the operating account, so it doesn't really get into the general fund. You could make them put it in the general fund, and then we just simply move the money back to them as to pay their expenses. So I think it's a matter of just cleaning up the ordinance or
Standardizing it.
standardizing. Yeah. So
Okay, thanks.
yeah, it is. And then Tracy Turbeck made the point too that operating account that SMG has, that's legal property of the city. If SMG leaves, that we have a legal right to that operating account. It isn't like we can't have claim to that money in there. So it's.
Councilor Anderson.
Rich, when you're talking about adjusting the ordinance on this, though, isn't each contract a little different? The baseball stadium has a different contract than
Yes.
what the convention center, arena,
and
event center have.
Yeah. And one thing too is that the operators, especially Terry Torkelson, wanted some flexibility when working with promoters. So I think that's going to come up when we have that discussion on the ordinance. How much the city council is willing to give the operators flexibility on that fee. So it's a complex issue. But certainly, if we do have agreements, we don't want the agreements to trump ordinance. Ordinance is the law, and they should harmonize with the ordinance.
So we're going to have to take a real hard look at those agreements.
Yeah.
Especially the baseball agreement before we amend any ordinance in that direction.
Yes.
Councilor Erickson.
Just on a side note, I attended a meeting with SMG, Director Turbeck, Jim David, and Bixler as well, Dave Bixler. And that was part of the conversation about the agreement and the management agreement. And those in my opinion, we need to change the ordinance that best works for us and how we want to see it work. And if they need to amend their agreements, they can go back and amend their agreements. Because it doesn't necessarily, the way that we looked at the agreements, there are some conflicting literature within that. And so we need to just fix the ordinance moving forward that there is the flexibility, and we'll talk about that at fiscal next. But we had a pretty long, in-depth conversation about a very small dollar amount of fee that is collected.
Okay. All righty. Councilor Staggers.
Yeah, I guess I'm just sitting here, and this thought just crossed my mind. The City of Sioux Falls is spending over $117 million for an event center. And we don't usually talk about all the interest we have to pay on this. But has there been any thought about doing an audit of the construction of the event center?
Well, there was an audit done on the internal controls of Mortensen Construction before I think before the project started. I believe it was Ide Bailey on their internal control structure, and then we've talked to the Public Works team about how they what they do with the pay requests and that sort of thing. And
so there's been no
have we done a
talk
formal
about
audit?
Hmm?
No, we have not done a formal audit of the whole project.
Yeah, will we ever do that? Of course, maybe I should be asking the fiscal committee about this, but there's some issues out there, and we're not getting very much information. And this is a lot of taxpayer money. And now we hear, your comments here about, well, they're not exactly doing things right. And we want to make sure they do it right. And we don't want the city ripped
Well,
off or anything.
we always put on these management agreements, we always put those on our annual audit plan. We just haven't done that, the new agreement with SMG yet. But certainly we do the management agreements for anybody that operates city facilities like the pavilion or the golf courses or the zoo.
Can I ask, Rich,
Yes.
when do you do your annual list of recommended audits? Is that in
We
October?
prepare that in the fall. We'll work with the city directors, and usually we'll present that at the December city council meeting after it goes through audit committee. So it's normally the end of the year. We present a resolution to the full city council, usually December, early January.
So in
with all
December,
the-
we approve as a council?
Yeah, you approve that as a council, by resolution.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes.
I mean, to me, it seems like we should maybe, as a city council, have that as a priority to do an audit of the construction of the event center. Because we're also now building an indoor swimming pool. And if there's some things that we can learn from the audit of the event center, maybe that'll be for the good for the indoor pool, too.
Councilor Erickson.
Councilor Ralphin, we have a procedure for that, don't we, as far as recommended audits to Rich and his team? Can you just expand on that?
Rich, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know you have number one, you have a system of the big money things that we make sure that we go through on a regular basis, and then if you make those the A and then the B are spread out a little bit more, not quite as often. And then anytime a director or a city councilor or anybody like the mayor, whoever in city government this way feels that an audit needs to be done for one reason or another, then they can request it, and it comes before through Rich, and it'll come to the audit committee, and they can either approve it or disapprove it. For instance, after the transit committee the task force that I headed did that, I suggested that we do some things, not because anything I saw or anything or whatever, but it was just time to do one of transit, of the management contract, et cetera, that we have with transit. And so I recommended that, and the audit committee said yes. So those are the safeguards we've got. If there's something that you want, then all you got to do is ask, and we'll consider it.
Yeah, in the past, I've requested an audit, and specifically in regard to consultants, how much money the city's spending on consultants, and I appreciate, Rich, you doing that. But when it comes to the event center or something like this, it seems like this should be something not for an individual council member to be pushing, but for the city council as a whole. I mean, this is such a big issue, and we're spending lots of money. So, I mean, that's basically where I'm coming from.
Tracy, if I may, Tracy, do you have any idea? Does your department or does something? I know many times after a project like this, there is an audit, so to speak, that happens of construction costs and making sure that we were billed the right thing for the right amounts and things. Is that going to happen, or am I not right on that?
Tracy Turback with the Finance Office. I guess I'm not certain I understand exactly what you're referring to. Rich alluded to the independent CPA firm that was brought in on the front end of the event center project to essentially audit the policies and procedures that Mortensen Construction had internally to make sure that the bills that we were getting from them on a regular basis for the past couple of years were being compiled properly and were supported by adequate documentation, and that that kind of set the stage for the entire project in terms of having the right process down in the case of the event center project. And I'm not sure exactly what procedures or steps internal audit has done. I think the project team would certainly welcome that in terms of a review of if you want to look at the entire project, pick a sample of pay requests throughout the project. However, I think we're certainly confident that we've got the appropriate records and documentation to support everything that's been spent on the project.
If I may, one
more,
and I don't know that that's not a bad idea, and I'll give you an example of that I would support what you're saying, Councilor Staggers. We built our church a number of years ago, and we happen to have an accountant attorney in our congregation who went through all the contracts and all the orders and things like that after it was done. We were charged for taking off the topsoil and digging the basement and putting the dirt in a pile, which just sat there. And then we were charged for it being taken away. And then when we needed to put the top fill back in, we were charged for it brought back in, but it sat there the whole time, the same dirt. And is that the kind of thing you're thinking?
Well, I don't know if this happened with the event center, but, you know, we should take a look because, once again, we're spending lots of money.
Yeah.
And we want to make sure that, once again, we're not getting ripped off.
I would encourage you to bring that to the audit committee or talk to Rich about it.
I would suggest an email to Rich with that recommendation that Rich then could bring to the audit committee when we meet and for approval. Councilor Anderson?
Councilor Rolfing covered what I was going to talk
Councilor
about.
Jameson?
Rich, when you did the audit and looked back at the original ordinance, what year was that ordinance created?
I have it with me here. I thought it was, I think the rates changed in 2005, but let me.
But the actual ordinance, do you know?
The actual ordinance, yeah, it looked like 12/13/2004. So just the end of 2004, it changed. And then when they did the recodification, they changed the number, but they didn't change the ordinance. So it's been a while. So it's been about 10 years. So.
Okay, thanks.
All righty. Do I have any?
I have a motion.
Councilor Anderson?
I move to executive session to consult with legal counsel about proposed or pending litigation or contractual matters pursuant to SDCL 1-25-2, number 3, and discuss personnel matters pursuant to SDCL 1-25-2, number 1.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Motion and second for executive session. All those in favor